Thanks for invitation. It's important for me to show you what's going on in Ukraine till nowadays, since 2014, and of course since the full-scale invasion. I grew up in the city called Berdyansk. It's near Mariupol. As a kid, I spent a lot of time on the seaside and, of course, in the area. And this is my home. And when I start thinking and became a photographer, I didn't thought that I will come to the war and will do a war photography. Of course, I knew that there was a scale of interest in that sphere, but I never thought that I will do that job. Firstly, I would say that we will see some graphic stuff. And I'm always asking myself why and why it's happening. And I found the answer. What the Russians say, it's because we can, to prove you that you can't do anything to us. And since 2014, when I came to Donbass, I saw how the Russians create this map and how they want to divide Ukraine on the two parts, on the southeast and the northwest. This is my hometown. It's here. It's Mariupol. It's here. And we start driving to this territory to verify what is happening. At the same time, we heard the speech of the Putin that if you Ukrainians will put your forces close to the border and to prevent, like that events is happening when a lot of revolts or separatism came in the region of after Crimea, that the people will stand in front of the tanks with their children. And this is, I didn't realize that's why. And then I saw it, how the Russian propaganda influenced on the local population of Ukraine. And when Ukrainians come to stop the separatists, or there was a group of Girkin, of Russian soldiers, special forces, they stopped to, local Ukrainians start to stop Ukrainian army. And we saw how the occupied city halls, policemen were captured. But the young guys, they give them a weapon, and how the war began. They created the checkpoints. And we saw the first war crimes against international jet were flying above the Donbass. MH17 flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, which killed mostly 300 people on the board. On the beginning of 2022, all of us thought that what is in the news, that everybody said that Russia will invade. Nobody will believe that. No, as well us. No. Why they will invade? Yep. Nobody was preparing. We arrived to Mariupol at 1 hour before invasion. Knew that this will be the key city because it's lie down on the coast and the land bridge to Crimea. It's the same map that I showed you before. That's how that it was. They thought that they will take the Kyiv for 3 days, but Mariupol saved Kyiv because it was give, how to say it correctly, yes. It was too much violence going on. The city was surrounded so quickly in a week, and we saw the first deaths, including kids. I never saw that before. I never saw the crying doctors. I never saw so many children and people were gathered in the basements like this one, like who gathered 2,000 people in it. And nearby was the same 2 buildings, which collect 6,000 people. The people fled inside the town who have no cars, couldn't evacuate early. So they stuck. The life above gone. Everybody is down to the shelters. But unfortunately, when we came to the hospitals and build relationship with the doctors, we saw how ambulances and regular people start bringing injured people, dead people, including this even small one who was like less than 2 years, like Kirill. Like Ilya, who was decided to play football with his friends. Like many others who coming out to find the food, water. For a city with mostly 500,000 residents, inside was around like 350,000. So the Russians start to burn the city inside, like in the medieval ages. Start they firing, burning everything what inside, including, and later, of course, sending propaganda. I didn't realize when they turned on the radio and we heard the city is surrounded. There is no exit. The one exit only to the Russian side, and you are under the shelling under Ukrainian army. On the one day, we were like on the 9th of March, we were near the hospital. And later we heard, will be a sound, I don't know. No. After we covered, we verified that Mr. Lavrov said that, oh, there is the maternity hospital occupied by the Ukrainian army. We heard the sound of a jet who threw around like 4 bombs on a city. Few of them were very close to us. When we came after 20 minutes to the site, we saw a woman on a stretcher, doctors who were running out from the hospital, and rescuers who are helping to evacuate injured and killed. Irina, the woman on a stretcher, did not survive. There is a lot of misunderstanding of the image, particularly this one. There was another pregnant woman who was used for Russian propaganda, telling that she played a role of the actress. when we were allowed to file in the middle of the night these images, and all the editors received it. Next day, we saw so many front pages publishing the same image. It so rarely happened. And the same was the Russian reaction. The Russian embassy in UK write that this lady, Mariana Vishemirska, played the role of the actress. She is a beauty blogger. But the funny thing, that later she became a Russian propagandist. After every big story, of course, we need to do a follow-up. That's why we came to the hospital. When we were photographing Mariana, who survived, and the other pregnant ladies who were giving birth, we realized that we are stuck. The next building being captured by the Russians, and tanks roll on the street. It's when I saw the tank with a Z sign, I was thinking it's like a swastika, in the Second World War, like a Nazis coming. And then he starts shooting to the street, to the building, and here comrades on the other tanks roll again. And we realize that we are stuck. We are stuck with with a hospital full of people and doctors who was lying on the floor. And in the one moment, the cannon were turning on our side, and we ran away. Likely he didn't shoot at that time, but next day he came and shoot to the building. At this shot, the Russia, but this similar tank shoot to the building. He killed 2 people who were disabled, 2 disabled women who couldn't go down to the shelter. Unfortunately, they were buried under this house. But others who were died on the street or in the hospital were buried in the mass grave. There is no clue and direct numbers how many people been killed in the siege of Mariupol, but probably the number is according to officials, is around 25,000 people. We were able to run away from the city through the 15 Russian checkpoints and came to Zaporizhia on the 15th of March in the night. Likely that we didn't been captured, and whole our team, in safe, and the policeman Volodymyr who saved us, help us. I think that's it, and we can see more, but I think this is about the Mariupol, but the most the famous stuff that we photographed.
So thanks very much for the presentation. It's really powerful. One of the things that I found quite interesting looking through your presentation is, the sheer number of newspapers on which your image was shown. And I wondered, because you work for Associated Press, so you're not working for one publication. So when you take an image, you send it to your bureau, and then it can go all around the world. Does that feel to you like a good thing? Like you can therefore send this image really widely? Or is it sometimes a bit difficult in that you kind of lose control of that image and where it's used and how?
For me, working particularly in the war, and for me it is important that information, and especially visual information, visual fact, will spread as much as possible. The AP, of course, every source has a lot of subscribers, like Guardian, Telegraph, New York Times, and others, media outlets all around the world. So that's all the subscribers have access, to that image, and they can use it. And for us, it's for me, it's a positive result that I can, see that its impact have, for example, like this impact or other photographs being published all around the world, and it will be seen by so many people.
And what's your impetus for taking these photographs? Are you thinking, you want to inform people, let people know what's happening in the here and now? Or is there another thought that it's important that you're gathering some kind of evidence and documentation of what's happening?
So nowadays, my work is, of course, to do photographs, but as well to help other colleagues who are all around Ukraine, our freelancers, and to help to publish their images, because it's, for me, I cannot be in all of the places all around Ukraine at the same time, because it's so many things happening. And for me, I want to show not only my work, but as well the work of our colleagues who do the same as me. And they are collecting these small fractions of the pieces of information, and how later we will verify what happened, for example, in Kharkiv, in Odessa, in Zaporizhia, etc. And unfortunately, I wish to have a teleport and and instantly travel there, but it is impossible because of the logistic, because of the security issues, and etc. But we are trying to help each other in the field, and colleagues as the same, our colleagues who live in the bureau, and as well they understood what we need and what we are doing. That's why we have this connection and understanding. So now it's become harder because of the security issues, but we are trying to do our best, to have as much coverage as possible from all around Ukraine, because this is important, this is personal, because so many Ukrainians are dying every day. If you are opened in news or reports from the rescuers, you will see every day there is a fire, new destroyed houses, the people become homeless, or they become without their parents or without their sons, and this is important for me.
So, for example, when you were photographing in the hospital, there was various bits of information going backwards and forwards about what was going on and whether civilians were being injured, for example, and you mentioned war crimes. So, do you feel that that's something important that you can do with, the sort of documentary nature of photography, that you're gathering proof in some way of war crimes?
That we can say that this is the war crime images, yes. Of course, we are not a policeman, yes, who are doing the specific report on the documentation of the war crimes. But we are independent journalists who have reputation, or we have our sources of spreading information, like AP. Nowadays you do social media as well, and it can't bring instantly your resources or your home back, but it gives understanding. It gives, for example, when we are interviewing people, it gives them a voice as well to be heard. And I want that people to be heard. I want that pictures to be shown, because who will show as well? You have many thousands of journalists in Ukraine every day, but they are collecting pieces, and this is so important to collect. That's how we will later create books, narratives, and galleries, and all these exhibits, and we'll see from the side what's happening in the time perspective.
And so when you upload an image to AP, what information are you able to attach to it? Like we heard earlier this morning, people talking about, there are images, but then there's the text that goes with the image. And that is so important in adding, some kind of explanation of what's going on. So what is it that you're able to do on the ground?
So when we write in the caption, of course, it might be very accurate and of course to be verified. If we know, for example, this is a missile attack of the Russians or this is a drone, if we can specify, for example, type of weapon which can used, for example, we are trying to do it. Of course, when it's instantly, it's sometimes very hard. When you could do more general questions, it's a Russian attack on the city of Kharkiv, or it's or it's a missile attack. And later we write a report that this is a Korean rocket hit Kiev on the 24th of April. It killed 13 people. Maybe instantly it's not impossible to verify the type, but we are trying to do as much as we can to write or general caption, maybe with a number of deaths is at that time.
So how would it work on a day-to-day level? Are you uploading, 20 images on a typical day with caption information?
Sometimes you not do any pictures, sometimes you editing, sometimes you do research or producing something. Nowadays it's a challenge, of course, to produce, because you need to think ahead, to have negotiations, to build the logistics, and to find the story which will be the new one, more interested for the audience, which have not been seen before. So that's why it's as well pitching stories to the editors, find the budget, and then do this planning and then go. So sometimes you're not doing any pictures. Sometimes you go for everyday life and to see what's going on. And we have I'm as well do a lot of funerals, because I think it is important to the names of the Ukrainians who have been protecting their land, to go and to create even the picture. It will be maybe gone in some time, and nobody will remember it. But for me, it is important that these persons are being involved in the war, and their names should be there as well, because not so many people well known, and not so of all of them will write an article. But I think it is our goal to do that.
So you've taken photographs all over the world, not just in Ukraine. So obviously working in Ukraine is a bit different because it's your country and you've been directly affected by what's going on. Does it feel different to you? And what are some of the positives you can find in that? And what are also some of the negatives? So say, for example, it might be that you're accused of being more partial because, it's your country that you're photographing.
This is, of course, good and bad. I'm Ukrainian, and I'm not happy that this is happening in Ukraine. I'm not happy that the situation, what's happening in Israel, Gaza. And when I see all of these images, what we experience to have in Ukraine, and now we can understand what is going on all around the world, because it is the same. The crying mothers and the killed children, and this pain of the parents is the same everywhere. It's typical, and at the time it's like a deja vu. Unfortunately, when you go in starting from last month, I came from the trip from Greenland, and immediately we come to Odessa, and then to Kryvyi Rih, then Sumy, and then Kiev. And three of these, Kryvyi Rih, Sumy, and Kiev, were typically the same. We came on the aftermath, then the hospitals, then the funerals, and interviewing, of course, all the victims. And the same in Sumy, the same in Kiev. so repetitive. And what's going on, you understand that maybe it's a good thing that I'm Ukrainian, because I'm working here in Ukraine, because I can understand the language. I can understand the thought from the half of the world. And but all of that influence on us, on the mental health. Now we are, all of us, exhausted. All of us wanted to have a rest, but we realize that this is not a short run. This is a marathon, and we still don't know where it will be the end and for how long it will take. So all of us trying to keep the energy, sometimes to have a pause to recharge the batteries and to keep going.
I found it really interesting that you also have an Instagram where you have a lot of followers, and you're therefore able to show your images with direct comments from you yourself. And it seemed to me that this is really different to working for AP. I wonder if you could say a bit about what it's like as a photojournalist to have that direct outlet that you can use, as well as being able to tap into the media.
I think it is important nowadays for everyone who involved for example, in Ukraine, to inform what is going on, and this is just this instrument of direct sending the image of and expression what you saw and what you felt, and nowadays you should do it because it's must, of course, and I think it's not only for the people, but as well for the editors, for other clients of the AP, and the people who just maybe will not go to the website or will not see it on the other article because sometimes it's a graphic image. And not so many media will publish it, but there is a room for it. And I think it's important to do it because otherwise no one will see how the brutal war is. I don't want to disturb people, but if they don't want, there is, of course, they are black on YouTube. If you want to see, you click it extra. But for us, it's important to show the reality. This is what actually Ukrainians want to send to the world, that the war is still going on. And we are, as Ukrainians, we are in a really bad situation, like David and Goliath fighting, so it is like that.
Do you think by having that direct outlet, though, you draw more attention to the fact that you are like an individual person and taking these photographs? So it's, I was sort of thinking about how it might contrast with the idea of evidence, which has this idea of being impartial, and you're kind of building a case that would be convincing, whereas if you are seen more as an individual photographer taking pictures, it suggests all the things about how an individual might see the world.
Like, it's personal, everything, and when you're there, you need to understand what's going on. Not so many people being on these attacks or at the front line, and if you can do it, you should use as much resources as possible. No matter, you should do video, you should do photo, you should do now stories, and etc. Now I rarely do stories, but mostly posts and the Facebook, Instagram, and and send into the wire, and many people will see all around the world. Of course, I cannot involve all the person on the planet, but I can say that I'm Ukrainian, I'm a photographer. I just want to show you what I saw. Maybe you don't like it. I don't like it as well. I don't want to have these images at all. But while it's happening, you should see it.
Do you feel, that's quite interesting, that you feel people should see things, and that even though sometimes it might be difficult images, So, you know, in more of your presentation, you've got images that I think wouldn't be published by UK newspapers. Do you feel there's an obligation to take those pictures, and also that you want to show them and to be able to see them?
I think it is important that if they are exist, I wish them not exist, but they are. If the people don't like to see this horrible stuff and to be informed, they can unsubscribe. It's easily. I'm not pushing everyone to see it, you know, but for many people who want to be informed, they want to, you know, to see, like, we're starting to follow the photographers and videographers from Gaza and etc. What this young generation who've been just 20 become a journalist, you know, like, and start to do their job, and you see what they saw. Oh, it's a hell. Like, it's and I wanted to be informed.
So do you think that it's quite interesting that there's alternative news sources now for people to access images of Gaza or Ukraine or, you know, Sudan and various other places?
It's not so many of us. It's not so many. If you will count the people who are doing similar job, if you can, maybe 10, maximum 20 people in Ukraine. It's not so many. It's not so many. So, like, I wish we would have more, but a lot of our colleagues been mobilized, and they are now fighting in Ukraine, or they become a press officers. They are doing the other job, you know, in the army. But I wish we would have, like, more evidences, you know, like, and more visual stuff, because the war will end, and what will be in the end on the pictures and visuals, and later we'll remember only by this, you know, what being recorded.
So this whole exhibition is called, you know, No Iconic Images, but you yourself have shot like a really iconic image that was published all over the world and won World Press Photo. And I wondered, what's your take on it? Like, is it helpful to shoot that kind of image because then it, you know, is spread so widely, and then if you win an award, it goes on to be shown again, like it has another life and another round?
So it gives bring my career to another level. That's true, but as well it gives a more trustability to the people, and the people we are start to speak with. They remember in the movie 20 Days in Mariupol, they remember the situation inside the Mariupol and our coverage, because there was, when we were photographing this, there was no other journalists who were doing the same. We're only one team who take these images. That's it. There's no one else. And all of other media gone. Of course, they wanted to save their families because of many local journalists. And what we have in the end, the main battle of Ukraine in 2022, been recorded only by 2 photographers. Like one videographer and 1 photographer. That's it.
And do you sort of feel a responsibility, therefore? I mean, like, in that particular occasion, but more widely as well?
My responsibility was on the 4th of March when I drove the last journalist to the evacuation point, and we decided to stay. And this was the key moment that we realized that we are here and we should stay, and because this is what's important.
Okay, I'm sure there's loads of questions in the audience, so we're going to open it up to questions now.
Can I start? Thank you for great talk, and Zhenya, thank you so much for your doing this incredibly important job for everyone and for Ukrainians especially. And just small question that we already heard about, like editor's perspective on ethics and red lines. And I just want to ask if you, as a photographer who on the field, have some red lines, what you will publish on your Instagram, what you will send to editors, just your, like, ethics codex, if you have one. and if it's important in general.
I try to send as much as possible, even to the editors, that they might to see, even they don't want to publish, but they might to see it. I remember there was an image, maybe I will see, maybe I will show it to you. It's here. Presentation. Like this one. I published, I sent it to the editors, and they cropped this image till the first body, you know, like, because they don't want to show a person, you know, on burning in front of naked burn. But I thought that this is so strong, and you will never seen that before, and it's so like this rocket killed so many 20 people on this market. I said, what the hell? So like it was just happened, you know, like 300 meters from me, and the world should know what's happened. Like maybe they will not publish it, but they will see it, but somehow they use and they crop it. I don't wish anyone to see this kind of stuff, and this smell, but it is like that. So like, I wish they would not exist, these pictures at all, you know, like, and would not have these deaths. Not wanna ruin.
It's interesting that you bring up the smell because, you know, we've been talking about photography as a way to inform people, but it seems to me that photography, you know, we're still distance, obviously, like it's behind a fourth wall and within a border, and we're not physically there in the way that you are with all five of your senses. But do you think, you know, if you're showing horrific images like that, we won't know what that smell is like. We will never have that direct experience that you had, but therefore we might end up being more distant somehow.
Unfortunately, sometimes it's triggered you, even you are driving somewhere, or you remember, and your receptors in the nose can trigger and give you the memory how these dead bodies smell, for example. Or you come into the shop and you see a guy, and you recognize that smell. He just came from the field who just recovered the bodies. And you realize, and you look to his eyes and said, like, yeah, it's, and you understand what he is doing just because of this smell. And yeah, it's if someone been in a morgue, they know how the dead bodies smell, so like, and burning and etc. So like, and how gunpowder smell, and so it's not give you alone sometimes, you know, like it's we have all of the Ukrainians have this collective trauma, all of us. Not so many people seen this so much as we do, but we feel the same, all of us.
Hi, thank you very much for fascinating insight. I'm a historian with no experience of photographing conflict, so forgive me in advance if this question is a bit intellectual, but I've read about various conflicts that war photographers begin photographing a war based on the lessons and the template of a previous conflict, but that by the time that war progresses a number of years, like the war against Ukraine, there is a new sort of photographic practice, a new template, and that emerges because of the conditions of that war. So I just wanted to ask you, since the siege of Mariupol to today, and the first 100 days of the Trump presidency, the second Trump presidency, what you think the most significant changes in war photography have been in Ukraine. Whether that be subject matter, whether that be the clients, what they are interested to publish, how much they're interested to publish.
So the big developments happened in the war coverage of the war happened because in the security on the security issues. Of course, the Ukrainian war is the most documented war, as before because of the technologies, yes? And could you imagine you are in a command point and you have, for example, these 10 screens like this, yeah, and you see the front line of your 5 kilometer zone from the drones, like fractions, and you control everything, and everything is recorded. If you can go back to see what's happened 1 day ago, 1 hour ago, and etc. So everything now is documented. All the front line, all the evidences of how the soldiers being killed or injured, or how the vehicles been damaged or destroyed, etc. Everything now on the front line is documented. Especially the front line, because it's the security sector and the forces don't want to let one of the sides to enter to each other. And our coverage is changed because of the drones, the same drones who are monitoring. Before we used to go closer to the infantry and documenting the situation and photographing soldiers on the front line. Now we mostly don't have these possibilities because there is so-called a kill zone of 10 kilometers. When you enter in there, it's a high chance of to be killed because of many type of drones. It's possible to enter, but everyone is go by foot. It's no vehicles going there mostly. So, and this is how this situation changed because of the technologies. About the situation on Trump and these 100 days, I don't see any changes nowadays. It's how the war going on. And today is a new attacks. The front line is the same. The Russians send their forces for the assault operations. Ukrainian try to prevent, or Ukrainian do some extra preventage in the Belgorod region, trying to go to the Russian side, and etc. So the situation didn't stop. So, and both armies use a lot of resources to fight each other, and the main problem now that everyone, all of the sides, wanted to kill infantry soldiers as much as possible. Of course, the guys who are sitting further and etc. So, but the main target is the infantry. So everyone wanted to destroy the infantry line to move forward.
Okay, well, I think we need to take a break now and get something to eat. So thanks very much, everyone, for listening so closely, and thanks very much to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.